What's the minimum amount of lenses you need to have in order to have a successful career as a photographer or videographer? And what lenses should they be? This is a question I asked myself in 2021 when I decided to upgrade my camera system from the Canon EF DSLRs to the Canon RF mirrorless system. I decided to sell what I have and completely commit to the RF system with my Canon R6. But I was buying a new camera and new lenses at the start of my career when I wasn't making a lot of money yet from photography and videography. So I didn't want to spend an insane amount of money and get like 8 lenses and kit the whole thing out. The dollars I spent and their effectiveness was really important to me. And this would be my only camera and my only lenses. So I knew whatever I was buying had to be very versatile and able to do all kinds of shoots for me. Weddings, events, product, studio, YouTube, and I wanted to get high quality lenses. I wanted those L lenses. So here's what I decided to do. I bought the Canon RF 24-70 f2.8L and the 70-200 f2.8L. And this ended up being a fantastic decision because over the past 3 years, I've used these two lenses and pretty much only these two lenses to build my entire photography and videography freelance business. I've used them on hundreds of shoots and they've earned me tens of times more than I spent on them in the first place. Today, I want to make the case for why this lens combo specifically is a great option if you can only buy 2 nice lenses and how you can use these lenses to do all sorts of different types of photography and videography. But I also want to cover what you miss out on by only having these 2 lenses because there are some drawbacks to only having 2 zoom lenses in your kit. Also, I went with the handheld mic today. I don't know why, so the most important question to answer first is why these 2 lenses specifically? Why not 2 other lenses or 3 lenses? But before that, real quick, I want to talk to you about motion array. If you haven't heard of motion array by now, you probably haven't watched my videos before because I'm a big fan over here, but let me fill you in because it's genuinely one of the most useful tools for creatives, whether you're a commercial video producer or a social media content creator. Motion array has a massive library of useful video assets like easy to use motion graphics templates, stock footage, AI voiceover, and like 10 other things. It's a service I've been using along with Artlist for years now, and for good reason. If you make any kind of money off of what you're doing, but you don't have someone to hire to do your motion graphics and video editing and all that kind of thing, this is what you need. If you want something that actually looks professionally done, that you didn't have to spend hours and hours doing yourself, you can just go to Motion Array, search up what you're looking for, choose from one of the categories, and select what looks good to you. Then you just download it and you can just set the text to whatever you want. You can change colors and stuff on some of them, but the hard work is all done for you. You can check out Motion Array now using my link in the description. If you use that link specifically, you get $50 off your annual subscription when you sign up, which is an awesome deal. So go check it out now. In past videos when I've talked about how I only use these 2 zoom lenses, one of the most common responses I've gotten is people saying, well, prime lenses would do that so much better. You should have bought primes. I think there is a scenario where you could get away with 2 prime lenses. Prime lenses can also be very versatile. Just because you're stuck at one focal length doesn't mean you can't use it for a lot of different things. And yes, the quality of these 2 zoom lenses is not as good as a prime lens is going to be. That's just a fact. And over the past few years, I've been tempted many times to buy a 50 f1.2 or the new Canon 35 f1.4 that just came out, and I probably will eventually. But for the type of work that actually makes me money, 9 times out of 10, my clients aren't going to notice the difference between me shooting at f2.8 or f1.4. And they definitely won't notice the sharpness difference between a high quality zoom lens and a high quality prime lens. Is the difference there? Yeah. Will I notice it? Probably. But if the people paying me the money to do the job don't care either way, then it's not a super great business investment for me to make at this time anyways. I just couldn't justify spending $3,000 on something that only myself and my peers would notice. The real benefit that comes with these lenses is that you have the range from 24mm to 200mm covered entirely at f2.8. You're still getting decent low light performance, and at f2.8 you can still get those blurry backgrounds everyone loves, especially with the 70-200 when you are using a longer focal length. You get a little more of that compression that helps with that blurry background. And with this focal range, I've been able to cover basically everything that I ever want to shoot. Landscapes, portraits, social media, weddings, corporate events. There are times where this setup falls short, but I'll get to that. But most of the cases I've had where I wish I had a different lens are ones that I was shooting for fun anyway. So it doesn't really matter in the business sense of things. Having a different lens when I'm out for fun with my friends shooting landscapes, those aren't the scenarios that are going to make me more money, which again, that's kind of the theme of this video. If you're just a photographer for the sake of the art of it, that's not really what I'm getting into here. Although this stuff still could apply, I want to mostly get into running a photography or video business. Because the difference between doing photography for fun or as a hobby versus doing it as a business is that every dollar that I spend is a business expense that should be reinvested into the company to make me more money. The line with photography and videography is definitely blurry for me because it's something that I also really enjoy and I'm really passionate about. And yeah, sometimes I buy photography gear because it looks cool and I just really want it. Like, that happens. It happens to all of us. But at the end of the day, especially the big purchases should be made with the idea that they're going to make you back that money. So that's what this choice boils down to. What two lenses are going to provide me sharp, high quality images in as many scenarios as possible? And this is what I came up with. Of course, the actual needs of each photographer are different, so this doesn't necessarily mean this will be the best setup for you. Another great option, if you know you're not going to use that telephoto range, but you want something wider, is to swap out the 70-200 with the 15-35. It's also worth mentioning that there are some benefits to only owning two lenses. One being that you never have to think about lens choice when you're planning for a shoot. The two zooms are just always coming with you. It also makes packing pretty light. Although the 70-200 is a little bit on the chunky side, I would still rather take these two zooms over 3 or 4 prime lenses if I'm going on a big hike and the weight of my bag is really important. Two lenses is also the perfect amount for 2 cameras, which I have. I didn't when I started, but now I have the Canon R6 Mark II and the R6 as my B cam. I'm going to sell the R6 Mark I this year and maybe get, I don't know, the R5 Mark II or the R6 Mark III when it comes out. That's a whole other story. Again, this just keeps things so simple. You know you have 2 bodies, you have both lenses equipped, you don't have to think about any extra gear. And if you're coming from a place where you're just starting out, you might think, wow, I wish I could care about extra gear. You know, I would rather have 20 lenses and 8 cameras. And I can understand wanting those things and like aspiring to own all the camera gear. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you ever talk to photographers who have been doing this for a long time, a lot of content creators who are photographers who have multiple cameras, multiple lenses, they often end up intentionally going minimalistic with their setup and going back to a more simpler time, because it actually can get kind of tricky when you're packing your camera bag and it's like, oh, do I bring the R5 or the Hasselblad or my Fuji point and shoot, or maybe I want to shoot some film, and do I want some telephoto lenses? Maybe I want some primes. The primes will look better, but I'll be able to do more with the telephoto. It's just a whole thing. And it is a nice luxury to be able to worry about those things and have those problems. But there is also something really nice about just never thinking about it, because you have your 2 cameras and your 2 lenses, and that's it. Now for a second, I want to address the negativity surrounding this topic, because for whatever reason, whenever I make a video talking about my zoom lenses and the idea that there's nothing wrong with rocking a zoom lens for a lot of practical use cases, I tend to get a lot of elitist comments along the lines of, I've been a photographer for 30 years and I've only ever used a 50mm prime and it does everything for me, and I would never use a zoom lens because they suck by comparison. Or real cinematographers use prime lenses every time. One day you'll grow up and become a real filmmaker and you'll realize this. And yes, those are real comments I've received, but I just want to address that crowd real quick. The crowd that hits the dislike button because they assume I'm telling people to never buy a prime lens ever. I want to make it clear. I understand the benefits of prime lenses. They are better than zoom lenses in terms of image quality and low light performance and size, usually as well, minimum focal distance. And I understand that when time, money, and portability aren't an issue at all, a prime lens is almost always the best choice for the job. But I want you to understand there's a large portion of people that do this as a living in weddings and corporate events and headshots and real estate. A lot of one-man band style productions. People who show up and crush it with just one bag of camera gear. People who need their equipment to work for them in a dozen different scenarios because the alternative is buying a million pieces of camera gear for each of those scenarios. So when I say that zoom lenses are more versatile than primes, or you should buy a zoom lens because your client won't notice the difference, it's just because I want people to understand that they can still be successful in their careers if all they can afford right now is a 24-70 instead of the 4 prime lenses that you would normally need to cover that same focal range. That all being said, there are some downsides to only having these 2 specific lenses as your go-to lenses. And I want to get into that because it's important that you know that side of it too. Although I have been able to work around all of these obstacles pretty well in the scenarios where it's come up. The most prominent issue, of course, is the comparison to primes, and I just kind of addressed that, but you will have worse low light performance with a zoom. f2.8 is still pretty solid, especially with camera's ability now to bring up the ISO pretty high with not a ton of noise. You also won't have as blurry of a background with a zoom lens versus a prime. Primes can go down to f1.4 or f1.2 a lot of the time, and you're just not going to see that in a zoom lens. And that can create a noticeable difference in the effect of your images, depending on what type of stuff you're shooting and who you're shooting it for. And lastly, with zoom lenses, your images won't be as sharp. Now with these high-end L lenses, they are crazy sharp. Like, they are amazing lenses. The quality I can get out of these is insane, but that jump from the point where these lenses are to where prime lenses are, in terms of sharpness and quality specifically, is not as insane of a difference as you might think. Again, it can be noticeable depending on your scenario, but in a lot of cases, people who are not in the industry won't care. Okay, so other issues with this setup. Outside of the prime lens debate, the most glaring problem with this setup is your limited focal range. Your widest point is 24 and your most zoomed in point is 200. Now that is a massive area, and it's a great, if you only have two lenses, that's a great range to be able to achieve. I find 24 millimeters to be wide enough for pretty much everything I do, to the point where it hasn't made sense for me to buy a 15 to 35 because it just doesn't come up often enough that I need to go wider than 24. That being said, there are times when I've been shooting landscapes or shooting room interiors or vlogging where I just wish I had something a little bit wider. There's been a few times where I've borrowed Anthony's 15 to 35 for a vlog shot, and the difference I can get with that compared to vlogging with my 24 to 70 is really nice, and sometimes I wish I could do that. I like your 15 millimeters way better for this.
Oh, 15 millimeters?
I can't vlog at 24 millimeters.
Gosh, I'll loan it to you for 5 seconds.
But I don't vlog enough and I don't make enough money off of my YouTube videos to justify that, just as an example. Then on the other end of the spectrum, 200 millimeters is really zoomed in for a lot of things, but there's also a huge selection of types of photography that it's not zoomed in enough for. Wildlife photography, some types of sports photography. I noticed with motorsports photography, it's pretty good, but sometimes like a 400 millimeter would be really nice. This is why last summer I bought the 800 millimeter f11 to shoot the solar eclipse, because the 200 millimeter just cannot get that zoomed in on the sun. And yes, I did buy that third lens last year. I know I said I only have two lenses, and the reason I don't count the 800 millimeter is because I bought it for kind of a stupid reason, to shoot the solar eclipse. This was one of those like impulse for the passion of it type of purchases. I've never actually made any money with that lens, and I've only ever brought it on the solar eclipse shoot, the shoot where I made a whole YouTube review about it. You can check that out if you're curious about that lens. And the only other shoot that I've done with it was when I went to the Canadian International Air Show in Toronto this past September, and I shot the airplanes with it. And I got some really cool shots of the airplanes that my 200 millimeter could just not capture. But I've never used it in something that wasn't like a fun kind of setting, which is why I'm not counting it on this list. And the last downside of this setup, because you're on a zoom lenses, is the minimum focal distance. In general, the minimum focal distance, also known as the shortest distance that the camera can still focus, is that in focus? That's pretty close. It's not that great on these zoom lenses, which is only a problem when you're doing something like product photography or any kind of macro type work, which again is pretty niche, so it's not a big issue for a lot of people. But I've done a little bit of product photography with these lenses, and there's been a lot of times where I've usually just had to crop in on my images because I just couldn't get as close as I wanted to with them. But there's still no comparison to something like a dedicated macro lens like the RF 100mm macro, which is actually why I bought it. Just this past Boxing Day, I bought the RF 100mm f2.8 macro lens because I've been wanting to get more into product photography, and the minimum focal distance on that is insane. I'm going to do a whole video on that once I have some time to shoot some product photos, but that is officially my third lens. After 3 years, I finally have a third professional lens that I can use for professional things, and it's a specialty lens. And because my business has grown and I'm making a lot more money now, it's a little more justifiable for me to buy these prime lenses compared to when I was starting out. So I might be getting some other primes later this year. We'll see. But anyway, all these downsides are still few and far between enough that this still comes out to be a very great versatile setup for what I need to do, and probably for what a lot of you need to do. It's lasted me 3 years and approximately 200 shoots, probably a bit more, it's just kind of a guess. And even though I have plans later this year to probably invest in some of Canon's new VCM primes, these lenses will still be a staple of my setup, and I'm probably still going to use them for a lot of shoots. Now, by no means do you have to buy these two specific lenses, but if this video has got you on board and you want to, my affiliate links for them are down in the description, along with all the other camera gear I use on a regular basis. If you want to check any of that out, it's a great way to support the channel at no additional cost to you if you were planning on buying them anyways. And of course, Motion Array is down there too. If you use that specific link, you get $50 off your first year of an annual subscription, which, considering how much stuff they have on there, is a pretty insane deal. Stay tuned for more cool videos in 2025. This is my first official upload of 2025. I haven't actually recorded a video, even though I just posted a couple like last week. I haven't actually sat down and recorded a video since September. I shot those videos months ago and they sat on my hard drive. I took some time away from YouTube to focus on my personal life and my business and the stuff that was, my client jobs. But now I'm back. I'm ready to make more content. I'm ready to make it better than ever. So hit the subscribe button if you want to see what happens.